It's now time to start our panels. The first is on our economic outlook. The moderator, Laura Beldin, Senior VP, Bank of America Private Bank. The panelists are Larry Webb, District Director, Small Business Administration, Washington Metropolitan Area District Office. We also have Buddy Rizer, Executive Director, Loudoun County Economic Development, and Terry Clower, Director, Center for Regional Analysis, George Mason University, and Alex Zhou, Yamibuy founder and CEO. So I'll let you take it away for the first panel.
Okay. All right, well, let's start it.
Very good.
Thank you so much for joining the Economic Outlook panel. And I'm so grateful to have all these wonderful panelists to join me. And let me introduce Dr. Terry Clower. And he is Northern Virginia Chair and Professor of Public Policy at George Mason University. And he is also Director of GMU's Center of Regional Analysis. And the center provides economic and public policy research services to sponsors in the private, nonprofit, and public sectors. Prior to joining GMU, he was director for the Center of Economic Development and Research at the University of North Texas. Dr. Clower also spent 10 years employed in private industry in logistics and transportation management positions. He also authored or co-authored over 150 articles, book chapters, and research reports reflecting experience in economic and community development. And our next panelist is Buddy Rizer. He serves as the Executive Director for Economic Development in Loudoun County, Virginia, which was named the 2021 Economic Development Organization of the Year by the International Economic Development Council. He leads the agency responsible for encouraging growth and developing relationships with the Loudoun's business community in both the commercial and agricultural-based business sectors. During his tenure, Rizer and his team have attracted more than $35 billion in new investments and tens of thousands of new jobs. And our next panelist is Alex Zhou, and he is the founder and CEO of Yami. While studying Kansas, he experienced the difficulty of having to drive 2 hours to reach the closest Asian market. This led to the creation of Yami, as he set out to help Asian Americans and lovers of Asian products in the state. And when Alex founded Yamibuy.com in 2013, he was a one-man show. From placing overseas orders to packing to consumer services. As of today, Yami has more than 2 million users and more than 200 million in annual sales. In the past 8 years, Yami has become the most popular destination for Asian goods in North America and Asian brands' best choice to partner with to expand their global impact. And our last but not least panelist is Nick Rajpara. Nick is an economic development specialist at the U.S. Small Business Administration, Washington, D.C. area Metro Office. In this role, he collaborates with local SBA resource partners, public and private, economic development organizations, and other stakeholders to develop support informational initiative which aid and assist small business and entrepreneurs across the capital region. In addition, He is the program manager for SBA's Emerging Leaders Program, a CEO academy which guides small business leaders on scaling and growing their businesses. So thank you all for joining our panel. And we're going to have Terry to start talking about the overall economic outlook. And then we're going to have Buddy to talk about the regional economic outlook. And then have Alex to talk about, on the ground, what he's experienced as an entrepreneur. And then we have Nick to talk about what kind of programs are out there that SBA is going to help our business owners. Take it away, Dr. Clower.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Laura. And if I seem a little nervous, it's because I'm not used to having Buddy looking over my shoulder as I'm doing the talk. Yeah, so any case, but it's a real pleasure. And I tell you what, you guys are in for a bit of a treat later on, because I had the chance in our conversations about prepping for this session to meet Nick and Alex, and you're going to really enjoy it. What I'm going to do is very quickly just give some highlights of what's been happening in the national economy, some directions that I see us going in, and talk about a little bit of the pain points, because as we all know, and we're all seeing in your own businesses, there are some notable pain points and how that's going to affect actual growth as we're moving forward. So there's no better way of thinking of the impacts in the pandemic of just think about job losses. We lost 20 million jobs in this country, and we lost those jobs not over a period that you would think of like what happens with a recession or something like that. We lost them virtually overnight, it seemed like. And unfortunately, we haven't had people moving out of the country left and right, but we've only gotten 5 or 6 million of those back. We're still down substantially, and yet what is one of our greatest challenges that we're seeing is being able to find workers in certain sectors. But here's something that's very important. Remember that from a purely technical economic perspective, the recession caused by the pandemic lasted about a month and a half. We started growing again very quickly, but it was off of a very big bottom, right? So while we lost about 33% of all economic activity during the height of the shutdowns related to the pandemic, we've come back a good bit, but we're still several percentage points below where we were at that peak. So we've got some growing left to do, and it's going to take some time because of some headwinds. A critical factor, though, that made this so different, because you think about what's going on out there. If you happen to go, if you're into boats and you went to the Annapolis Boat Show a couple of weekends ago, the power boat show, most of the vendors were showing used boats because they had no new boats to sell because the market's so hot for them. We had what we've called that K-shaped recession. People that are employed and in businesses that deal with technology, particularly information technology, but science, professional services, those continue to grow. Not to step on Buddy's topics, but in the region, particularly in Northern Virginia, in that part of the professional businesses services sector that's specifically for professional technical scientific services, we never lost jobs. We created jobs every month throughout 2020. And it just shows that strength of what was going on. Now, why was that? Well, because we saw people shifting their purchasing behavior and stuff like that to online. We were eating more at home, things like that. But what that meant was that folks that are most economically vulnerable and the businesses that have to deal with the smallest of profit margins were the ones that got hammered the worst. These are your personal services, restaurants, lodging, these kind of things. And some of those have adapted. In fact, one of the great stories that's going to come, and it was in this region and other regions throughout the country, is the degree to which businesses adapted to that changing environment. Think about this. In a matter of about 6 weeks, we turned the way we do real estate transactions on its head. We went from having to see a place in person to doing virtual tours. We went from having to sit in some office to do the closing on a house to doing it virtually. No touch kind of contracting kind of stuff. And the one thing that I was always hopeful about us during the height of the pandemic is that I have full faith in the ingenuity of our retailers and how to get money out of shoppers' pockets. no matter what, whether you can see them in person or you have to do it online or whatever, we have ingenious sellers in this market, and we have many of those in the room with us today and online joining this. So I see us moving forward and us being able to overcome much of this disaster. We're learning in part how to live with the persistent impact of the pandemic. We certainly hope that this gets over with. We keep waiting for it. I see some of you. I'll be happy to see some of your beautiful faces. I know that I actually look better in a mask, but that's okay as we go forward. But here's a couple of headwinds that we really got to think about. This labor issue, as you all know, is a real challenge because this is, and especially for small businesses, because you guys don't have, as business owners, the time or the financial resources to engage in nationwide search for staff. And of course, and then competing even with our big employers like Amazon and folks like that are coming in. So we have to really correct that. Now there are several things that are going on with that, but not the least of which is really a social issue that this has called attention to. We have got to come up with a policy solution to dealing with childcare, because our labor force participation rate, particularly affecting women in the workplace, has gone down below what it was for that segment of the population, below what it was during the Great Recession when we had 10% unemployment. We have got to find a way, and you think about right now, what's going on? Oh, the kids are back in school, yes, but if your child has, coughs twice in a row, guess what? They're getting sent home to be tested, right? So we got to figure out a way to address that key issue. The other is the labor force skills mismatch. What we are seeing increased demand for are jobs with some technical skills, but also a different social set of skills working in a tech firm versus what they might have had being a bartender or working as a waiter or something like that. So we need to figure out some things on that going forward. And the other, it's a real strike, is how are we going to actually culturally, socially, and physically adjust to remote work? Now, when we think of remote work, there's the two things, and I tell you that as much as 40% of the labor force was working remotely in May of 2020, according to the BLS. That number has certainly dropped down, but it's still about 20%, but the fact of the matter is most of those people are not going back to the office every day. Hybrid work schedules are probably here to stay. We were already seeing it this region before the pandemic started, and it was being done as a labor inducement. It was a perk to be able to work from home a couple of days a week. And let's face it, traffic in this region, it's a pretty good perk to say that I don't have to get on 66 or I-95 2 days a week, right? And we're going to see that continue. But the change that happened, and I know small businesses that are really struggling with this, you entered the recession maybe with 5 or even 20 employees, and now a fourth of them live in some other state. So instead of doing all the documentation, tax filings, and everything else in one state, you're now doing it in 5 states. And these are some support factors that you really, I think, we need to help some businesses with as we move forward. All right, let's move on real quickly then to a couple other topics, and then I'm going to transition to something and really give Alex a tee up for his section of this. Inflation. Okay, we keep hearing, we keep seeing prices are rising. We're talking about 5% consumer inflation rates at the moment, and but the Fed and the administration are telling us this is transitory. I think it's going to be a little bit more than what we think of as transitory, because these inflation pressures are being created a lot because of backlogs. One, about increased demand, because people are shifted their spending, they're going on less trips, leisure trips, buying boats and cars and things like that, but also because of shortages that are caused by supply chain problems. The most notable of which, of course, computer chips that we've all heard about. You can't buy the car you want because there's no chips available, or they're selling vehicles actually that are not complete, waiting on that chip to give you your last little bit of technology amenity or whatever it is. But this backs up throughout the system. Some of it goes back to labor. We don't have enough truckers. We were having that problem before, and we have enough folks that have just said, I don't care what you're paying me. I don't want to sit in a truck for 8 hours a day plus other time being away from my family 2 and 3 weeks at a time. And you can substitute a little bit of rail shipment for that, but you still have to have truck drivers that get the stuff from the railheads and into your shops and all that. And then we have the ocean side. So the pandemic is having differential effects in different countries. It's particularly hammered some of our Asian economies now and slowed down productions. But now we have the backlogs that are occurring at our ports because of our increased in consumption of imported goods. Give you some examples. Port of Los Angeles is moving in the wrong direction. They went from an average delay of ships waiting to come into the port of 4.5 days to about 5 days this last month, so from September to October. Now you think, oh, well, that's not a big difference, but keeping in mind that if we go back about 1.5 years or so, a container ship, to lease that container ship is about, give or take, $20,000 a day. It had gotten up earlier in this year to $40,000 a day, and now the most recent ones, they're spiking up to $200,000 a day that ship is costing the transit line to hold it, plus the operating expenses of crews, plus fuel and everything else. And so that's sitting there. Remember, a ship doesn't make any money if it's sitting still. And so that's all getting borne back into the cost of the products. I saw a real great one in a little news feed out of the Wall Street Journal today that is talking, and we can all look at this. So this is your tidbit as we move forward. Some of the retailers are using a strategy now that they're going to sell smaller size toys so they can fit more goods into a given container. So watch and see if we don't see the big, Big Bird versus, maybe an Ernie doll or something. I don't know. But you get so it'll be interesting to see how that moves forward. But this is going to persist for a while. I think we're going to see elevated levels of inflation due to supply chain problems for at least another year. This is going to take a while, and it'll eventually sort itself out. But during that period of time, it's going to require a lot of patience. Those of you that are in the e-commerce trade, how many times have you had to tell the customer, I'm sorry, I just don't have this to send to you yet, right? That story is going to continue for a while. All of that being said, that will slow down our pace of economic growth in the nation. And so we're going to be looking at, we're underperforming a little bit, I think, throughout next year. I would start seeing some real relief in us being back more to a normal footing, closer to the last part of 2024 and into 2025. And with that, let me turn it over to my colleague, Buddy Rizer, who can tell us a little bit more about what's been going on in this dynamic region.
Thank you, Terry. And just to be clear, I'm always looking over Terry's shoulder. Terry hit a lot of very important points. First of all, by and large, Northern Virginia weathered the pandemic pretty well. We have a very solid, a diverse economy, which really helped us. And the fact that the tech and government are two of our biggest industries really helped. But the impact was not an even impact. In fact, I would say the impact on our businesses has been very complex on the region's local economy and the well-being of our businesses. Overall, area businesses show both lost revenue by taxable sales and reduced staff as measured by workforce size and initial unemployment claims. But minority-owned businesses have experienced the pandemic most acutely. At the height of the pandemic, business owners of colors were less likely to be actively working. And at the end of 2020, minority-owned businesses were more likely to report to being in fair or poor condition when it came to financial health as their non-Hispanic, white, non-minority counterparts. Minority-owned businesses have experienced heightened risk associated with COVID-19, in part from being smaller, being concentrated in higher risk industries, and struggling with access to capital. It was a real eye-opening experience for many of my colleagues and I during COVID, because we all had these grant programs and we all came up with this programming to support our businesses. But what we didn't understand, at least not intuitively, was that not everybody was accessing that in the same way. So what we learned is we had to be more proactive. This isn't a field of dreams scenario. You can't just build it and they will come. You have to really engage in the communities and have that expertise and work very hard. And I'm really pleased that my colleagues and I and the NOVA EDA have the Economic Development Alliance for Northern Virginia has worked very hard to try to understand what that means. We've partnered with the Community Foundation of Northern Virginia and others on coming up with real data around minority-owned businesses. It's so critical that we understand what those needs are and what those demands are. And frankly, when this all happened, we didn't have that information. It just wasn't being collected. So we made a real commitment to that going forward, and we think that we'll be able to continue to help in a way that's going to be really meaningful for minority-owned businesses in the future. Terry also hit two other topics that are really impactful: workforce and supply chain. The battle for economic development projects in the future is going to be fought on the battlefield of workforce availability. There's just no question about that. Skilled and available workforce will determine the winners and losers in our new economy when it comes to communities. And it's something that we have to, again, be proactive on. The work that Victor has done in Fairfax and the work that Nancy Ivanko in Loudoun County has done with the Work in Loudoun program, these are going to be critical as we need to not only retain, but we need to attract and we need to reskill our workers. That's going to be critical. And finally, if workforce is going to define our success long-term, supply chain is going to have that major impact short-term. The supply chain shortages are going to change consumer behavior. It's going to have a major impact on prices. And at the end of the day, it's really going to impact our small businesses. So I think that we see locally a lot of the same issues that Terry brought up on a more macro level. So good on you, Terry.
Alex, would you mind talk about, like, you're on the ground, you're seeing what is going on in your business, what the challenges are you facing, also, like how the inflation is impacting you and also the labor market. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, Terry and Buddy really, address this, question from a high level. But me as a daily operators, we really see this from the ground level, right? We actually started to experience all the headwinds. To be honest, last year mostly tailwinds for at least for my business, right? We are in the e-commerce business, right? Everybody stay at home. So they have to find a solution online, so mostly tailwinds. But starting this year, you start to experience a lot of problems. For example, right now, labor cost is going up, way up. Right now, we're talking about 30 to 40%, increase on the warehouse labor cost. And with this highest rate we ever offered, we still have a problem to recruit enough, warehouse workers. During the last month, it's pretty high season for us. We still have at least 60 people shortage in my warehouse. And on the what Buddy and Terry just mentioned, international freight. Last year, a single container from China into Korea to Los Angeles port is about $3,000, $4,000. But this year, the highest is almost $30,000 per container. It's going up and down, With this price, right, you still have to wait to book a container, right? We have several container waiting in China, try to book a container to ship to the United States. And they just with this high price, they still, so on the customer end, they're gonna experience a lot of out of stock issues. That's why this all over the news, right? All the major retail out of stock. You see empty shelf in Walmart, in Target. I think the same thing happened to the e-commerce as well. We all know Asian countries are the factory for the work, right? We rely on international freight. And also we rely on frontline workers, warehouse workers to deliver all the stuffs, to our customers. But with this, heavy inflations on labors, on the freight, even on the product cost itself, as a daily operators, we know something is happening, and we don't know how long it's gonna last.
Thank you, Alex. And Nick, with all these things going on, what is the SBA able to help? Can you talk a little bit about the programs that SBA can offer?
Absolutely. Could you hear me? Okay. This is much better. First of all, thank you for being here. Yeah, I think there was a real nice high-level job done by Terry and Buddy on what's happening globally, nationally, and then locally. And it was just really nice to get a on-the-ground perspective from Alex. As far as programs out there, the SBA is a smaller federal agency, but we have been tasked in particular with the economic response to the pandemic, simply because the pandemic has so disproportionately impacted small businesses. To understand the SBA, you got to understand our mandate and mission as a federal agency dedicated to serving all small business concerns in the United States. This is done through understanding our 3 C's and a D framework. The 3 C's, the first C, of course, is the capital programs that the SBA has. People have heard of SBA loans. You know, whenever I travel, when I used to travel, you know, I'll go around the country and people find out I work at the SBA. They say the first thing, hey, can you get me a loan? That is a form of debt capital that the SBA guarantees. Typically, most loans out there, they're quote unquote SBA loans, are SBA guaranteed loans. But SBA has more than just debt capital. It also has an equity program, such as the SBIC program, where the SBA partners with venture capital and private equity, and they match funding. If your business is interested in that route, please do look at that. I could always post in the chat the link, sba.gov/funding options. And there's also grant programs for the science and tech entrepreneurs out there, the Small Business Innovation Research Grant and the Small Business Technology Transfer Research Grant. There are other grants out there that the SBA gives, but those are primarily for nonprofits that work with entrepreneurs and set up ecosystems, programs such as Community Navigators, the Prime Grant, SBA Fast and whatnot. So I'm not going to go into those a little bit. So the capital access is a big piece of what the SBA does, or at least what people know the SBA for. Then there's another piece of it, contracting. The second C, government contracting in particular is a huge part of the regional economy here. Buddy touched on it, Terry alluded to it. The federal government has a set aside of awarding contracts to small business. The magic number is 23% of federal spend should go to small businesses. The current administration is looking to increase that. There are various socioeconomic designations you could get to increase your probability for obtaining a federal contract. And you could read all about those on our website, such as the 8A, Woman-Owned, Service Disabled Veteran-Owned, and Hubzone, which is not based on socioeconomics, but is really based on your geographic location and where your employees reside. So federal contracting is very big, you know, and that is a great way to scale your business. The last C, which is the least well-known and the most underutilized, are the SBA counseling and training programs. The SBA gives grant funding to universities such as George Mason University, where Terry teaches, to set up resource partner networks, such as the Small Business Development Center, such as the Women's Business Center, the Service Corps Retired Executives SCORE. So these are different options that you as small businesses could take advantage of. The nice thing about the counseling services and the training services of these folks, of these resource partners, they're absolutely no cost to you. I don't like to say free, because they are paid for by your tax dollars. So you're already paying them, so you might as well consider using them. We also work with non-SBA partners as well, such as procurement technical assistance centers. And in addition to all this counseling and training, there's also special initiatives that the SBA has. You mentioned in your introduction of me that I'm a program manager of a CEO Academy known as Emerging Leaders. That is an example of an SBA special initiative. It's a competitive program We accept about 20 small business CEOs a year, and we have many more applicants. It's a 7-month program, no cost to the entrepreneur, the CEO, but we, the SBA, have a program where you are trained on scaling your business and poising it for growth in the next 3 to 5 years. There's other special initiatives as well that we will launch from time to time. And you could find all this right on our website. Our website is also replete with wonderful online resources. In addition to the counseling and the training that we provide by human beings, there's some wonderful online resources on everything from shipping, which was discussed, export, to pricing, to social media marketing. So I encourage you to go look at our Learning Center, look at the different programs that we have and the resources we have on our website to make you better business people. And of course, I talked about the 3 C's, but the last D, which is disaster, was just an afterthought before the pandemic. The disaster programs of the SBA were, before the pandemic, were really relegated to areas which were disaster prone. Think Florida with the hurricanes, think California with earthquakes and fires. Given the nature of the pandemic, it afflicts every part of the globe. So the SBA was the only agency that had programs in place to help small businesses from sea to shining sea in all its states and territories. And of course, some of you have taken advantage of the various SBA programs out there, such as the Paycheck Protection Program, which is no longer in existence, Restaurant Revitalization Fund. A program that is currently in existence, if your business is still feeling the after effects of the pandemic, the lingering effects, I should say, of the pandemic, is Economic Injury Disaster Loan. It's COVID EIDL. It's also known as EIDL. It's a low interest loan. It's deferred for 2 years, so you're not going to be making a note payment for 2 years. And of course, that is available till the end of the year. Unless, of course, there is a program which is passed, or a set of programs which are passed by Congress and signed into law by the president. So that gives you a general overview of how the SBA could help small businesses and entrepreneurs in these trying times and beyond.
Great, thank you so much. And we're open up to a Q&A session. And do you have any questions in the audience? And I know that we have some in the chat. Would you mind opening the chat?
Can you mind if I ask a quick question?
Oh, Buddy is asking a quick question. Great.
Yeah, and this is of Nick. One of the things I think we learned during the process, and first of all, hats off to the SBA and the Small Business Development Centers. They were incredible. Your work really was just exemplary during this. But one of the things we learned was the importance of a pre-existing relationship with banks. Can you talk a little bit about those mechanics and why that is so important?
Excellent question, Buddy. This was of particular importance when the SBA launched its popular Paycheck Protection Program. A lot of the federal aid let me take a step back. The SBA has what you call a preferred lender network, where the SBA has a formal relationship, a contract with lenders. Before the pandemic, this was typically for the traditional 7A and 504 loans, where you would go into these banks and say, hey, I want an SBA loan. Really what you're saying is I want an SBA guaranteed loan. Obviously, you have a higher probability of acquiescing these type of products if you have a relationship with your lender. Now, fast forward to the pandemic. So the only program that was in place when the pandemic hit, when we had shelter in place in March of 2020, was the Economic Injury Disaster Loan. Now that was a direct loan from the SBA to the borrower. When the ever popular Paycheck Protection Program was launched, it was launched through lenders, right? It was launched through lenders. Typically, it was launched through lenders that already had a relationship with SBA. But out of the Paycheck Protection Program, a whole host of lenders, traditional and non-traditional lenders, became SBA preferred lenders. Fintech organizations, such as fintech, I mean, fintech stands for financial technology organizations. Think Cabbage, think Blue Vine, think all these other, forgive me if I'm forgetting some folks here, but all these folks became SBA preferred lenders. The reason why it's important to have a relationship with your lender, to Buddy's point, is the people that got, the borrowers that were first in line to acquiesce programs such as the Paycheck Protection Program were the folks that already had a relationship with their lender, a close relationship with a lender, right? The folks that did not have that were not able to take advantage of it. Now, luckily, Congress reappropriated various rounds of funding for PPP. So if you were not up on that relationship totem pole with your lender, you still had a second bite at the apple. Some folks actually lost, severed the relationships with their lender and went to a new lender, such as a fintech, because the lender that they had a pre-existing relationship with did not give them the services that they needed. So having that relationship with a lender is super important, because if there's other funding programs that the SBA will deploy, they would typically deploy them through their lender, right? So having that pre-existing relationship is super important. Also for other things, even if it's not an economic aid assistance program for the pandemic, but even in terms of getting a working capital, working cap line, things like that, which are critical for your business, you need to have that relationship with your lender. I can't talk about that enough, and I'll be happy to do a segment with Buddy just on that.
Thank you, Nick. And we have some questions in the chat.
Hi, Laura. It's Richie here. There's no question on the chat right now.
Okay. All right. Well, let me ask a question. Do you see the risk of the Fed ignoring the signals of the inflation issues, or do you see the Fed will switch gears to address these issues?
So the Fed is in an incredibly tough position at the moment. Let's talk about a job you don't want to have at the moment, is trying to figure out which levers to pull and when. Because if you look at it, the unemployment numbers, are moving in the right direction. We had the lowest level of new jobs claims that we've seen since before the pandemic started this last week. Having said that, we're still nowhere near back to the employment levels that we need. There are still a lot of households in stress. We haven't seen the tsunami that could happen out of things like evictions from rental properties and things like that. The Fed is going to, they very much would like to ease off of the buying programs, the quantitative easing, and let that drive up the interest rates just a little bit from basically what amounts to zero at this point, and particularly on an inflation-adjusted period. Of course, right now the major interest rates are negative given our level of inflation, right? So they're trying to bring them up, but I think that there is a lot of pressure, and not to mention political pressure, that we're not quite ready yet. And it's going to be very interesting to see what happens as we move forward toward the end of the year. If they do pull back a little bit on their purchase programs, then you'll see notable rises in mortgage rates, you'll see some rises in lending rates, and all of those will actually slow down the recovery of one that we're actually seeing indications that our recovery is slowed anyhow. So I don't know, I wouldn't be a bit surprised if the next couple of quarters, if the Fed doesn't, kick the can down the road, if you will, and just not change anything, waiting to see some more solid signs one way or the other about the economic direction.
Thank you, Terry. And Alex, there are a lot of people starting this e-commerce business since COVID. And can you talk a little bit about the pros and cons about having e-commerce business?
Yeah, this is a big question, right? Of course, for e-commerce, you're not limited by your geographic locations. That means, right? we're based in California, right? We have warehouse in Los Angeles and New Jersey, but we can still reach to the customer from Kansas, from DC, from Virginia, right? This is one of the advantage of e-commerce. But generally speaking, for e-commerce, there are a little bit lack of experience side, right? For some of the categories, right, you still want to touch it, you want to feel it. For example, for fresh items, perishable items, you want to see if the apple you want to buy is fresh enough. You want to see the meat or seafood, right? This is one of the disadvantage of e-commerce. But after the pandemic, I think we all agree, right? E-commerce is gonna become bigger and bigger in the future. Everybody adopt this new way to purchase stuff. Because you can stay at home, just like somebody gonna deliver to your doorstep, right? And I think in the future, at least gonna be hybrid models, right? Most of people gonna shift. We're gonna purchase both online and offline, depends on the category and the urgency. And we're looking for the price or the convenience. So it's, I think in the future, e-commerce is gonna become bigger and bigger. But I don't see anything like the brick and mortar market gonna out of business. But I still because people still looking for experience, they want to see the stuff. So e-commerce will never match this kind of buying, purchase and shopping experience.
And if I can jump in on Alex's points, the pandemic did a couple of things that accelerated technical adoption, and we all saw the benefits and the uses of that. But it also accelerated what I've called the retail conundrum, because how and where and why we buy has a direct impact on real estate in communities. And so you have to start thinking about how can we reuse that retail space that may or may not ever be filled again. And communities have to start thinking about, when you're designing communities or when you're approving new developments, how much retail should be included. So it definitely is going to have a long-term impact, and something that we're going to have to watch as communities and those involved in real estate.
I would just add though, Alex, now that you've actually seen him online, I can promise you that your sales will increase by 50% and your profits by 70% if you call Buddy immediately after this session and arrange to move your headquarters to Loudoun County. You will do better, I promise.
Yeah, yes.
Thanks, Terry. I 100% agree.
And I can ask one more question, is that you talked about the challenges in the labor market. What kind of, how do you attract the skillful worker? That's my question.
I tell you what, Buddy, why don't you talk about what the Alliance is doing in your initiatives, because you guys are on the front line of this.
Yeah, I think that, we recognized several years ago that talent was going to be the differentiator for communities. And so we've made a concerted effort as a region through the Work in Northern Virginia portal, which has been just a tremendous success in linking those who are looking for jobs or looking to improve jobs with the companies. And we have done that on a scale in Loudoun County as well with our Work in Loudoun portal. But the idea is that we need to, pending whatever happens, given telework and work from home scenarios, we need to be able to respond to business owners. When you look at the number of open positions there are right now in Northern Virginia, and you subtract the unemployment rate, we're still upside down. There are more open jobs than there are people unemployed. And so it's about reskilling, it's about attracting people here, and it's about thinking about it differently. And it's so critical to the future of our communities.
And just to put a number on it, just so you know, right now, if we look at the Washington metro area, there are over 60,000 open positions for computer occupations, computer-related occupations. And interestingly enough, only about 20% of those ads mention anything about remote work. So, you know, and while there's going to be more remote work, it's always going to be, at least for the foreseeable future, a fairly small part. So we need those workers to choose to come live in this region.
And that's where quality of life comes in. It's where affordability comes in. And it kind of highlights the importance of affordable and a mix of housing, you know, which has also been we didn't even get to today. But that all plays into workforce and the importance of making sure that we have an environment where people want to be.
Great, thank you. Are there any more questions? This is
I had one
our
more
last
question. Whether or not Terry bought a new boat when he was at the boat show, and if so, when's he inviting us all out on it?
Well, we bought one in July. Does that count? And you always welcome to come out because we have fishing to be done. We have a question in the audience.
Yeah, this is our last question.
Okay, thank you. Joanne Briones with Beta Systems International, a small GovCon company. I guess this question is directed to Nick, but I guess it could be open to everybody else since we are talking about virtual workplaces. So Nick, in regards to like the Hubzone, do you think that the SBA is going to be changing its guidelines, you know, with the new normal of, I guess, teleworking and virtual working? And I guess for everybody, what type of impact do you see it have on like business spaces, business suites, you know, as you drive in, you know, you see all of these like large GovCon companies and stuff, and like how those spaces will be used?
Okay, great. Excellent question. And your first part of your question was very specific, so I'm gonna give you a very specific answer for that. The SBA has already updated its Hubzone guidelines. In fact, I encourage you to go online. I do the Hubzone, I also do the Hubzone site visits, you know, which have been virtual in the last over the last year, or the last fiscal year. But the SBA is, in response to COVID-19, the SBA has introduced a whole host of Hubzone flexibilities, which allow for teleworking. Site visits are done virtually. So, you know, I'll send you a link. You could email me. I'll send you a link and where you can find that. But yeah, that's all available. It's all online at your fingertips. So please review that. As far as the more general question of reimagining, rethinking the office space, particularly for federal contractors and for the federal government writ large, I'll tell you this. We are in the process of, as a federal government is in the process of doing a lot of surveys on the federal workforce on what their preferences are, whether it's working from home, working in the office, hybrid, and what the real estate footprint would be for the federal government. Kind of goes into Buddy's point. I know, in fact, somebody like Buddy would be very interested given the fact that, you know, there are federal office spaces in Loudoun County, quite a few of them. So anyway, what is that going to look like? I think as the federal government kind of figures this out, you know, through OPM, GSA, and the various agencies tasked with this, I think contractors would follow suit as well. Now, there's certain types of federal contracts which, you know, are harder to do and deploy virtually, such as construction, right? And such as facilities management. But I believe that locational requirements, you know, are going to be updated. We see it with the Hubzone program because that's the real obvious one. The Hubzone, I didn't get too much detail into it, but that's the certification which you get based on your location. And you get that based on the location of your principal office. That's where most of your employees work. That's your principal office. So now the SBA is allowing the principal office workers to telework, for example. Also, yeah, where most of your employees reside as well. So of course, telework is built into the mix. And I think it's going to be a reality. So as the federal workforce moves away from the traditional going into the office, you know, the federal government has typically been resistant to telework. Certain agencies are more forward to it or have been more forward than others before the pandemic. I know that there's several government contractors that have been very forward to telework. You know, I know, for example, Booz Allen Hamilton, I know they had a liberal telework policy since the 1970s. So before computers and internet connectivity, they still had a very liberal telework policy. So anyway, I hope
Thank
that gives light to your question.
Thank
And I know
you, Nick.
Terry has done a lot of work on this already, and it will continue to do a lot of work on this. But I'll tell you from my standpoint, you have a disconnect right now. You have a lot of business owners and managers, leaders who say that that productivity is down, that collaboration is lacking, that innovation is lacking. And then you have a workforce that's saying, we love this and we want this flexibility. And to go back to my earlier point, in that scenario, workforce is often going to win, as you can see from the recent Amazon announcement. So it's going to impact. I mean, we just had a company that moved from Tyson's out of 45,000 square feet and moved their headquarters into Loudoun into 10,000 square feet. We're happy to have them. Don't get me wrong, but I think that we have to watch that, and it's going to have a lot of impact on real estate decisions going forward.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Well,
This
thank
is
you.
also interesting for small businesses such as Alex. I think we were talking about the pre-call, as big companies, big businesses such as Amazon are offering greater workforce flexibility. Alex, how do you compete for workers, which likes of Amazon says, okay, we're going to let you work remotely? What kind of things could you do if you're trying to attract from the same talent pool?
And
Yeah,
Alex
first
have
of all,
like 30 seconds.
we're okay to work like remotely. That's what we did, in last year. But because the nature of our business, we have both, office workers and warehouse workers, right? We don't want to create a situation that warehouse workers have to come to work every day, but office workers have the advantage to do their job at home, right? So that's why we encourage everybody back to office. But again, right, how do you gonna up against giant companies like Amazon, Google, right? It's too early to tell. It's still too early. But there's some beauty of our like startup company. For example, we can offer really attractive, right? The option pools for our employees. We're still growing the company really, really fast. And also, right, for startups, you can see what you build every day. Compare, in Amazon or Google, you're one of the, just like, the part of the, you're not seeing, what you build. But for our company, you can say, okay, we are actually making impact for the business, for the customers. So this is the way we track our customers. But, we try to be as flexible as possible for our employees. Just after the pandemic, right now, a lot of employees still have problem to send their kids back to schools, right? So we still offer them, okay, you can still work from home. Consider this is special treatment for you. But long term, I think we have just wait and see when all this like pandemic ends. What's the market, what's the labor market looks like, what real like employee wants, what company wants.
And thank you so much, our panelists. And if you want to find out more about U.S. economy or global economy, feel free to talk to Terry. And if you want to find out more about the SBA programs, feel free to reach out to Nick. And if you want to find out about the Asian products, check out Yamibuy.com. And if you want to find out how Loudoun County attracts businesses, feel free to check with Buddy. So thank you so much for joining us, and this session is concluded. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Great discussion. Hey, buddy. Good to see everybody.